want?
Oh, Jesus Christ.
No, I'm already recording, but you just want to wait for the sound, the people stop talking. All right, you're ready.
Jan, how you doing?
I'm doing fine.
So, this book, unlike the last book, has given me, at least it's stuck me with larger chunks instead of smaller pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And if I get lost in some of this, I want to give you a safe word.
Okay,
Say that word, let it go and just move on.
okay.
So if you say the pearl is in the river, I'll know that it means I have to stop talking.
Okay, so the pearl is in the river.
There we go.
So, all right,
Just keep it very subtle.
okay.
So just the title, Ghosts. The last book, Ancestors, Spirits. This book, Ghosts. The quality of the conversations with the ghosts. And some conversations with a few of the ghosts that brought me back to conversations with Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer.
Mm-hmm.
And if I could just invite you to just kind of go.
Well, yeah, I mean, talking about Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer, and I love those two books, grew up with them, and I love Mark Twain. So to me, you're making that association is a great compliment to me. I did imagine, and I always have imagined, talking to my family who are gone, dead. I've always talked to them. So for me to think about the idea of ghosts and talking to ghosts and have them be be characters, it seemed very natural to me. And Zachariah was, just came to me because, the Civil War, and there were more ghosts produced out of the Civil War than apparently any other war. Now, people might challenge me on that, but I think that's true. And in, I believe it's not it's Gettysburg, where there are so many people who come in the evening to take snapshots of the ghosts that are roaming around on the graves. It's almost become a hazard for the locals. But that told me that the idea of a Civil War ghost was perfectly natural. Hence, my character.
But the way you wrote about it, it really felt like your relationship with ghosts extended so far beyond both books.
Yes, I would say so. Yeah, I mean, people, ask each other, oh, do you believe in ghosts? I mean, do you? Do you believe in ghosts? And I said, well, yeah, of course. Don't we all? I mean, believing and knowing, who cares? For me, it's kind of the same thing. And of course there are ghosts. And they have interesting things to say, and they do not talk the way we talk. Because they talk more in riddles. And, because all of my readings of other literature and movies where ghosts show up, they kind of say things, but, they leave it up to a live person to figure it out. They're more like sphinxes in terms of what they say and do.
So we're going to stay with this, but go a little step to the side. Your reference to quantum mechanics and the potential of some of the things that people refer to as ghosts or as spirits or as this other world can potentially be addressed through a subatomic world. Very interesting to me personally, because that's how I see us, the equivalent of spirit world. And if you can expand on that, again, this is a personal interest to me, and I think it's really exciting about the book because the ghosts are so present.
I'm sure you know a lot more about quantum mechanics than I do. But what was interesting for me is, the Roman poet, right now I'm forgetting the poem, but it's the ancient poem that is the character Daniel, who's a professor, talking to his students, and he realized that, Thomas Jefferson had in his library, I think it was 6 copies of that poem, which meant that this was of interest to these men who wrote our Constitution. And what did they know and what were they thinking? I mean, again, we talk about them, they knew about the Enlightenment, they read Voltaire and read other writers, but the fact that Thomas Jefferson had this particular poem that was over 1,000 years old in his library meant something, that they believed that God was manifest in the natural world. And that is very different from most of, Christianity. So when we talk about these guys were Christians, I think part of me in teaching in the book, it interested me that they identified as Christians, but what did they really know and how did they really perceive who God was? And again, I thought, wow, I wish that I had been in a class like the one I put Daniel and Tom, his nephew, in to begin to understand that.
The obvious question, which I probably should have started with, is your relationship to the Civil War. And I've always thought, how civilian war, very accurate. Civil War just kind of puts a polish on it because it was so uncivil.
It was so uncivil. So bloody. I mean, really unbelievable. But what was of most interest to me is just this very idea that the Civil War may have ended slavery, but it did not end racism. In fact, I think if anything, racism just went underground and was always there. It was like a time bomb. And into this, up to now. Look at us. Look at us. And when I was writing Ghosts, I was aware Obama was president, but I was becoming aware that, wow, we're becoming divided. And so part of putting characters together, I had Daniel is a snobby Berkeley professor who thinks he's superior to his sister, who never left their little town in Ohio, and married to Billy, who was her high school and had a bunch of kids. So he kind of looks down on her. So I brought them in because actually his sister and Billy turned out to be sort of heroic in the end. And so I thought, just this idea that we have so many thoughts and prejudices about each other, they're just getting worse and worse and worse. And what would happen if we had to find out that we're not so different, we're not so far apart? But that was my idea when I was writing the book. And look at us now. I don't know what to say about how bad things are now.
Well, I mean, this moment in time has been the first time in my life where the Trump era actually cleaved just between family members, between friends.
Absolutely.
That, unlike anything I'd ever experienced,
me too.
and the only thing I've ever known that was similar was a Civil War.
Right. Right. And the idea, again, there is this idea that because our Revolutionary War did not solve the problem of slavery, and we know that half of the people who were writing the Constitution owned slaves, particularly think, what's his name? Thomas Jefferson. I mean, we all know, and even then, the hypocrisy of it is, we're dealing with that now. Because these people did own slaves, and they knew it was wrong, but they didn't know how to solve it. So, in a sense, the Civil War was absolutely predictable out of the Revolutionary War. the whole issue of slavery. And then, of course, we were, moving westward, and the states would either become slave states or free states, and that's really what catapulted us into the Civil War.
Well, the intimacy of that war is what always has been so horrific.
Yeah. And it still is. It still is.
I mean, our contemporary war can be clean hands and the drone goes wherever it's going versus having to hand-to-hand combat, see, feel, touch the person that you're maiming, killing.
And the way it was won was Grant just threw human bodies into it. He just kill them all. And that's how Lincoln won a lot of that. There's only one way to win this war because the Southerners were superior, superior strategists, fighters. I mean, that's pretty clear to me. And again, a lot of the the Unionists were not particularly, could care less about slavery. Not everyone felt that slavery was the issue, and they just wanted to get it over with. But it's a huge issue, and it still is.
Well, I like that what we're talking about is kind of like trying not to track mud into your house. I mean, it's all over the book, and that you can't escape it.
Right.
So, how about epigenetics?
Yeah, well, it's, to me, I have a very simple idea of what it is, only because, as a therapist, I believe that there are certain people who inherit certain memories and certain understandings. It's genetically inherited, and you can see it in families. This passed down, these traits or these, abilities to see things that others don't have. And, again, the idea of that traits are inherited and carried down through, family lines. And, again, I sort of saw Tom and his mother as being, both of them as being more psychic than the average person. And because she's not at all surprised he talks to, the ghost, their ancestor. But everyone else is trying to figure out, he's talking to a ghost, and we should take this ghost seriously. But Tom and his mother do. It's like, oh yeah, of course. So, I don't know what really to say about epigenetics, except that it partially explains the idea of some have psychic abilities and some people don't.
And I don't have the sophistication to talk about what I'm going to talk about, so
I probably don't.
in sort of the tangible mysteries in the arts, like people that really do perform spontaneous music,
Yes.
and that place that you end up in that allow it to happen. So great solos are rarely ever played again by the soloists because they don't know what it is that they've done. Working in my own studio, I built something 2 to 3 months ago, and I have to rebuild it, and I can't.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot find the person that did this. And this is happening this morning. And I tie that into just a terminology. We use ghost, we use spirit, whatever you want to use for this essential human material. For communication, for letting go at a very specific moment. Mm-hmm. And I got that feeling through the book. And some of it I found very, very funny. The therapist talking to her therapist.
Yes.
About the patient that talked to ghosts.
Yes.
And I think that's, I mean, if you can throw a little energy at that, I just think that was delightful.
Well, think what you began with is, you know, when you create something and you know, there are those moments when you just feel like you're channeling something and you have no idea really where did that come from. And writers, you know, we all hope for those moments because then you write something that's hopefully interesting and really has that whatever it is. Oh, that's great. And I had a lot of those moments writing Ghost. I really did. And one of the things that at the end of it, you know, again, a few people saying, hey, you need to rewrite this, a lot of it doesn't make any sense. And with this book, I said, no, I'm not going to rewrite it. I know what I was doing when I was doing it. And in fact, I don't know if Gabby remembers, but we were in Hawaii when I started writing Ghost. And I thought, I'm just gonna let my mind go. And I did. And I almost had no idea what I was writing. And then I knew, too, that I set out to write a thriller with a truly evil character.
Benjamin.
Yes.
I was going to ask you if you wanted to just kind of break down what sort of went into the mental workings of what really makes a character that makes you feel dirty when you're finished reading about him.
Well, first of all, I think to me, really scary characters are, you don't see what they actually do. You don't see the violence, you don't see, there's that quiet. Remember, he comes and he sits in Morgan's bedroom. She doesn't know he's there and he watches her. To me, that's about as creepy as it gets. And again, cults are creepy to me because they really allow people like Benjamin to you know, turn people into, you know, his family. And then, but he kills them. You know, he brings people in, and I never, as you notice, I never show him killing anyone. But you know, when he invites them down to the river, they will disappear. And you know, and again, the evil, the charm. I mean, how do people get? These serial killers get into someone's house. Oh, hello, hi. You know, there's a friendly kind of. He charms, you know, young women. Of course, he almost kills that young woman. He intended to. And again, to me, it's the silence. You don't actually see the violence, but you know. And so in your mind, it's, you can imagine it. And everybody imagines worse than, to me, it's more scary. Let me say that. To imagine it than it is to actually tell people what happened.
I wanted to know where, and this is an East Bay question, where the name Sugar Pie came from.
I don't know. I just, you know, again, that she's, you know, what the old term is multiple personality.
Yeah, Morgan, Beth,
Morgan, Beth, Sugar Pie, and I just, there had to be a Sugar Pie. There had to be one of the characters who was promiscuous and wild and crazy, and that was Sugar Pie, and that name, it just came to me. Sugar Pie.
Sugar Pie from Oakland, very famous black rhythm and blues singer,
Oh, I
Sugar
didn't know
Pie
that.
DeSanto. And first, after she made it big here with Johnny Otis, she went with
Really?
James Brown, etc. And I just, that's
Yeah. Had I known that, I don't know if I would have used the name.
you could have used Edna. That's a really dangerous name. So, another personal question. The Rothko that shows up in the description.
Yeah, I think that was in Rebecca's office. You know, I don't understand Rothko. I really don't, but I just love looking at his paintings. And I don't know if I've ever seen an original Rothko, but I've seen, you know, there's so many reproductions. I just think he's a wonderful artist.
Well, they're mystical.
They are.
And-
They are.
And I was quite young when I saw my first one, and I thought I was peering into a cave because I could see the light disappear. And they're absolutely
They're incredible.
remarkable paintings that require time
Yeah.
and quiet. And I was glad you used that because one of my favorite artists.
Yeah.
So how about Milliken's Bend?
Yeah, I had to do research on that. I hope I got it right. It was very little known period, in Civil War, and even Grant in his writings, after the war, and I think Mark Twain helped him write his autobiography of, the campaigns. He mentioned it briefly, I think in one sentence, but it really was an amazing time. And these were these were actually slaves who had been freed because of Lincoln's, what was it?
1850.
Yeah, well, actually, it was later, during the war, contraband, that apparently, if an army captures things that are owned by the other side, they call it contraband.
Right.
Well, the slaves were owned. So these were slaves who had been trained for 3 weeks and given inadequate rifles, and they still held back. And I think it was the Texas Brigade, one of the toughest, that was coming in on them, and they held them back. So it was one of those amazing heroic moments of the war that is very little known, and it should be known. And so I used that as as Daniel's thesis. He wanted to write about Milliken's Bend because very little people knew about it, and of course, his nemesis. Thank you. Benjamin was, furious because he knew, yes, the Africans who were finally, fighting for both sides, actually, but the Union side, were all quite heroic. And we simply don't think of that. And I certainly didn't learn that in history. None of us did.
Well, I mean, it made me think about the Second World War and the young Japanese men that were interred were given the opportunity to be drafted.
Yes.
And they put the majority of them in the 441, which had the highest death rate of any platoon and company in the Second World War. I mean, it was done intentionally. And I mean, just anything that deals with war and with the type of situation that you describe here.
I think the Civil War had it all. I mean, and people do. I mean, let's face it, people still, spend hours and hours studying the strategies and what the generals were doing and who was doing what, and have, what we call it, panoramas, or, actual
reenactment?
Yeah, they do, but it's not just the reenactment, but
beautiful scale models.
Yeah, they have models that they actually study it. So but again, I think it's actually so much who we are as a country.
And that's sad.
That's sad.
And especially
That's sad.
since we're back
Right.
in
That's
that
sad.
spot. I mean,
We are.
It wasn't a distraction, it was just this, I kept coming back to this quagmire we find our country in.
Yes.
And how we never learn.
We never learned. And that's the saddest part. And in a sense, when that beginning, when Zach is talking, the ghost, is talking to Tom, he's trying to tell him that, you're our only hope. You young people are our only hope to, learn from what happened. Because he thinks the rest of us are pretty stupid. And they've gotten a little too religious along the way.
Let me see. I'm trying to think what. I don't want to go near the end of the book, because it's very easy to have a spoiler on what is a sensational end. I mean, it's really
Thank you.
it's cinematic.
I'm glad you think that.
Absolutely. I guess all in all, what, for me, the combination of you touching on many things that I was interested in made me want to talk to you more about those things and even give you a linear description of the book.
Great.
Because these topics are large. And they're, and I think a lot of people are uncomfortable with the concept of ghosts and
Yes,
spirits.
yes,
As it, when I started teaching at a university, it was 1970 in Minneapolis, and 40% of the students came from farms.
mhm,
And the first thing that I was shocked about was what we'll call intuition,
mhm,
or a feeling, or something which you just do because you somehow have this natural innate talent. For many of these kids, they brought some kind of a stigma that it was the devil
yes,
that was in you,
yes,
and these things had to be out of you. And my classes were all about courting these things, nurturing these things, letting them go. Just
yeah,
when the feeling's in there, go and let it, you're not driving the bus anymore. Let whoever's taking it go.
yeah,
And all of that came back. I found it a great trip, and I could hear all of the conversations, the quality of the conversations with the spirits.
yeah,
That was really, really important. I could see Donald Trump appear
yes,
over and over and over, and I couldn't separate it out
yeah,
from the book, and that gave the book an amazing, real novel, real documentary. It all worked together in terms of not being able to take it apart as an experience. It was
yeah,
bound,
great, thank you,
and I thought it was wonderful.
thank you,
And I hope that some of these questions were things you wanted to talk about,
sure.
because I was
Yeah.
selfish. I wanted to talk about them.
Well, I love to talk about anything in terms of I really do. I enjoy talking about what I was thinking about when I was writing my books, but I do need someone to, ask me something. I love that.
Can we ask you questions? Can the audience ask? Because it'll be
Sure.
the bear. Do you have a personal relationship with a bear experience?
Yeah, that part of the country, which I'm going to talk about when you have your MFA show.
Yeah.
I went to a camp for 3 summers up in the Trinity Alps, and that part of the river where we used to go down to a swimming hole, I used in the book. That I imagine going down the path, down and crossing over. And by the way, when I was there as a kid, I was on a couple of bear hunts, and there were black bears, and they used to be grizzlies up there. So I made Jimmy a grizzly. But now we shot them all. But I think maybe they're coming back. But Jimmy the bear was very important. And you remember that scene where I talk about what people did to a bear when they...
Right.
And I thought, you know what? It's horrible. And who's going to want to read this? And I thought, no, you need to read this.
Yeah.
Because as you know, in all my books, I talk about animal rights. And, when I was there as a kid, it was logging country, it was bear country, it was really pretty wild. And, now I think you're not allowed to kill the bears. And, there are bear people and non-bear people. I'm a bear person. I just think they are amazing animals. And, you know, and again, what we've done to them, so I used the Jimmy Bear as a character in the book. That's why we put him on the cover.
Yeah, well, with those luminous eyes,
Thank you, Karen.
you know, absolutely, because, you know, when I can imagine seeing the glint, be it a bear, a wolf, a German shepherd, a crazy cat, when you are connected to the eyes.
That's right.
It's, yeah, that's very primitive, that's limbic system, bang, just
That's right.
taken over, and yeah.
Yeah, and again, I use that scene with the fire because to me there's something so primordial and you know, apocalyptic about a fire. And of course that was Benjamin's whole idea, that he's going to, you know, incinerate everybody and except himself, and he thinks he's going to save himself using the Jimmy cloak over him. So, you know, and I didn't quite know, I remember writing that scene, I didn't know how I was going to do it with, Benjamin wasn't going to die, but how am I going to show he escaped? And of course then Billy comes with the helicopter and saves Daniel.
I got one more question. I think Tom started talking to Zach when he was 10 years old.
Mm-hmm.
We meet him when he's 18.
Yes.
And I was so curious about the quality of conversation at 10 and how that developed to 18. So I have no problem believing it. I don't even have to suspend disbelief.
Right.
I'm there. So I don't know if you've thought about it or if you can address it. It's just a personal curiosity.
Okay, let me be sure what you're asking, because yes, he met his great, I forget how many great, I think it's four great uncle. And when he was 10 years old, but I don't remember saying what that conversation was, but I think it was, you know, calling Tom. Here's how I imagine it. Tom's growing up, he's 10 years old, this ghost comes and said, hey kid, I want to talk to you. And he talked to him outside in the backyard. And he just, yeah, okay. So Tom is the kind of kid who just thinks, hey, yeah, I'll talk to you. And of course, where's Cameron? I had Cameron in mind. I think Cameron would have said, oh, yeah, there's a ghost here and I'm talking to him. So what? You know? That's how I imagine Cameron would be. And so I imagined him at 10 talking to a ghost, and slowly but surely, clearly he's being groomed by Zach to, you know, do exactly what he's going to do, which is to somehow understand what that war was all about and what are we going to do about it. Because we didn't learn our lesson then, but here we are. How many years later? 150, 160. We could still learn that lesson if we studied that war from that point of view.
Yeah, I think as long as it's humans that are in charge, we're always gonna end up in the
I
same.
think so.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think so too.
Unless, you know, and again, I think in the book I was looking at that younger generation, and it's maybe putting too much on them, I don't know, but they need to understand, I think.
But they rose. They rose and they handled it. And everybody survived.
Right.
Which I think is a really optimistic.
I'm basically an optimist, even though I think we're all rather dreadful. I am basically optimistic.
Well, up until 30 years ago, let's say, even if people didn't get it totally, most of our information in our history was contextual. Just listening in school to somebody talking about, you know, the Spanish-American War, Korean War, whatever, building of the Panama Canal, until the internet.
Until the internet.
And the ability to pick a piece of information as if it was one grape off a bunch and drop the rest of it.
Right.
And I mean, I just see that as so dangerous because this whole thing is about developing a context,
Yeah.
putting things in certain places, seeing a line. And that's one of the most frightening things to me about where we are right now is this lack of continuity of information.
Yeah. I know. Except, you know, again, the way history is being written now, there's so many really fantastic historical writers like John Meacham. And really and truly, you know, these writers were not even born when I was in high school, and now they're writing about, you know, our ancestors now, our people, important people. And I just finished reading a book about Lincoln, and you learn what an amazing human being he was. And there's always more to learn. And those books were not available when we were growing up.
Right.
That kind of information. So part of the internet is a huge problem, obviously, but the other part is, one thing I read, and I think this is really interesting, the younger people, because they don't have to memorize so much, they can go right to the internet and they are constantly learning, and learning is right at their fingertips. And you know, we in school, we had to memorize stuff in order to pass, and a lot of it was boring. And you know, but we had to take up all that time, and our brains were memorizing. Now these kids don't have to memorize. So I thought that's very interesting.
The only thing that's nice about memorizing is it's kind of like money in your wallet.
Yeah, that's true.
You
Yeah.
you own it, you take it with
Yeah.
you,
Right.
you can apply it.
To everything.
I completely agree, but I think the point of this writer was that we had to memorize a lot of stuff that wasn't important to us.
Yes.
And, you know, we had to spend our brain's time doing that. And it would turn off a lot of, you know, to me too, about learning history. I was not interested in hearing about dates and, oh yeah, the Civil War. I had no idea really what about the Civil War. It was just something, it was mentioned. And then when I started really writing, or learning about it, and spending time reading history, it changed everything.
I had a teacher in high school that was so brilliant, which I didn't realize until I was teaching. When he taught the Civil War, the very first day, he described what surgery was like
Yeah.
in the field,
Yeah.
and had drawings. And other than you never forgot it, you came back to that class, and he must have had a theater background, because he was able to make all of it alive. The stuff that was horrible, you remember.
You remember.
I mean,
Yeah, it's
it
true.
was, that first class was like an accident in terms of you
Yeah.
shaken.
I did read some author wrote a book about surgery that was done in the Civil War, and they amputated right and left.
Yeah.
And there's a character in this book, and I'm sorry I can't remember, who comes into the surgery and says, "Doctor, we have a mound of members out there. What are we going to do with that? I mean, it's getting bigger and bigger."
Yeah, there
And
were
the
mountains
doctor
of
says-
limbs. Yeah.
Yeah.
Corporal, sergeant, whatever, don't bug me, I've got to amputate this other guy here. Just find a solution.
Yeah.
But we can't even imagine that.
No.
But that's probably what happened.
Yeah.
I mean, they would amputate an arm and throw it out the tent.
And you know, so many of them died of sepsis because, you know,
On top of that,
pretty much
Right.
how it was going
Right.
to go.
which is really interesting because if you look back in history, Richard the Lionheart died of sepsis.
Yeah.
And in 1100,
I think more people are dying today
Right.
of sepsis,
one of
you
the
know, than
arrow.
we realize.
Right, right. And the people in the Civil War, again, were dying of sepsis.
Yeah.
Mama Cass choked on a sandwich. I think that's tragic, right there.
I do too.
Yeah. I mean, sepsis, sandwich, I think it was ham and cheese.
Yeah,
You end up in the same place.
you do, yeah. That's why I got one of those thingies that you put on your mouth. And I told Trevor better learn how to use it because we old people will choke.
Okay, you guys.
Jan, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was lovely.
I have one more question though, the river. So any river Styx, any river
Absolutely.
metaphorical.
Yeah. No. To me, in all my books, I think there's a river. To me, there's something about the metaphor of the river, the ever flowing. And again, that river that I used to swim in at Manzanita Ranch, the camp, was the South Fork of the Trinity River. It was the most beautiful swimming hole you ever saw, and it's still there because the camp became a school, and then finally the school ended, and some people bought the property, and I looked it up on the internet. They're selling the property, and there's the swimming hole. And I said, that's it, that rock, I know that rock. And then across that river and up, you found these old cabins where these old guys, like Cal Gates, he was a real person. He came over to our campfires at night. He'd tell us stories, and he came one night. He had this huge bandage on his hand, and he unwound it. He said, "Yeah, a rattler got me, and it was a rattler I just shot." But he said they're still dangerous, and apparently it got caught up. So we were all.
I love it. It was a delightful book. It was a great read.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm very excited because I haven't read it yet.
Okay.
That was a real